Okay, so the importance of literature and reading. A woman by the name of Cassandra Clare once said, "Only the very weak-minded refuse to be influenced by literature and poetry." Civilization today wouldn't be where it is without the influence of literature. We've used it as a communication and education tool throughout our history. We also use it to spread universal truth throughout the world, and it gives people the ability to express themselves in ways that they just feel they can't audibly. Without literature, we wouldn't be where we are today as a society. Now, one of the very first things you learn in school is your ABCs, and that's so you can learn to read. And reading is used for every form of academia, whether it's mathematics or history, English, or even science. And a study by a group of librarians called the Summer Slide found that students that didn't read over the summertime fell behind 1 to 2 years in their academics. This study focused mostly on lower income students because they came from lower income households, which they don't have as many books. And also those households reside in lower income neighborhoods, which have lower income school systems, and those school systems don't have the funds to provide the resource of books to their students. Now, literature has also been used as a communication tool since we were humans here on Earth. Before the 20th and the 21st century, the only real way to communicate with people was through writing and verbally, because they didn't have telephones, they didn't have radios, they didn't have TV. So unless you lived near someone and you could walk over and talk to them, you were writing to them. And a lot of people also kept diaries, because the only way they could express their thoughts and write down what they were doing that day was on a book, because they couldn't tweet it or send it out on Instagram. And a lot of those diaries turned into major literary works that we now study and really enjoy, like Helen Keller's diary or Anne Frank's diary. An example of a man who used his literary work to spread his ideas was William Shakespeare. Now, David Linton did a study on Shakespeare and how he became a critic of the media, but also current events going on through his work on his plays. One example of that was King Lear, which was essentially, if you haven't read it, a play about a king who had these 3 daughters, and he had to decide which one of them he was going to give his inheritance to in his kingdom. Now, during that time of the play, Queen Elizabeth was coming into power. So it was kind of Shakespeare's low-key way of telling the world how he felt about having a woman in charge. Another example of people who used a literary work to spread a new idea happened here in America, and it was the founding of the United States. And it happened with a pamphlet called Common Sense, which was written by Thomas Paine. Now, this pamphlet basically held the idea of a new government and a new nation. And what would happen was colonists who could read, because not a lot of colonists could back then, would read this little pamphlet out loud to a group of people who would then take the idea and tell it to new people, who would then tell it to new people, and then other people. And that's how the idea of the United States got spread to the common people. And it could very easily be argued that without this little tiny pamphlet, this little tiny piece of literature, we wouldn't have formed the new government and we wouldn't be the United States that we are today. Other examples of people using their literary work to spread their new ideas and beliefs were Abraham Lincoln and his Gettysburg Address, or even Martin Luther King Jr. and his I Have a Dream speech. Now, literature is so influential in our lives, and it motivates people and changes their mindset so much that a lot of dictators get really terrified of literature that doesn't agree with what they believe in. We all know about Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Germany powers and them burning books, or the Night of Broken Glass as it's been more commonly termed. A man by the name of Alan Zampino actually wrote an article about the burning of the Hebrew Bible. In this article, he talks about how at some instances the Nazi Party would force the Jews to rip up and burn their own Bible, and in even worse instances, they made the Jews tie their scrolls, the Hebrew Bible scrolls, to their back, and then they would chase them down and kill them with their Bible on their back, just because they were so threatened by this different religion that didn't agree with the Nazi Party beliefs. A more recent example of this happening actually happened in France a couple months ago. It was with a magazine company called the Charlie Hebdo, and what happened was this terrorist group killed 10 journalists and 2 police officers who were trying to defend the journalists because of what they were publishing. Now, this started a whole new movement called Je suis Charlie, which means I am Charlie in French, basically promoting the idea of freedom of speech and freedom of press, or just the freedom to write and say whatever you want. So there's no question that our society wouldn't be where it is today without the influence of literature. The United States wouldn't be the United States without a tiny pamphlet written by a man named Thomas Paine. And we use literature for everyday instances, such as communicating to each other, whether it's through a text message, or if you are writing in your diary, or writing on Twitter, and that's almost a piece of literature in itself. We use it as an education tool, and we wouldn't be able to educate ourselves as effectively without it. So going home today, I just want you to realize that even if you don't like to read, your life has been shaped by literature more than you realize. And when you have kids, or if you have kids already, just realize what books they're reading in school, what books you're giving them, because you never know how much they're actually influencing your child.